Are you trying to foster innovation in your organization, but team meetings end up feeling like an uninspired replay of previous ones? Many leaders face this challenge. They have smart team members, but unleashing their team's creative genius seems unattainable. Fortunately, social neuroscientists like our guest, Caroline Szymanski, can offer us science-backed insights and strategies to boost team creativity and performance. Carolina earned a PhD focused on social neuroscience and team collaboration from the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. She went on to apply what she learned in her doctorate program as part of the teaching and coaching team at the Hasso-Plattner Institute School of Design Thinking in Germany. In this episode, Carolina breaks down insights and practical tips on team facilitation, activating brain circuits to help teams synchronize their brainwaves for better performance, avoiding common mistakes that lead to groupthink or team discouragement, the importance of building and sustaining trust, reducing the impact of stress on teams, and much more. We also touch on Carolina's passion for helping people cultivate relationship intelligence for couples and parents of young children, and why she founded Relationship Holidays, a retreat center based in the Azores Islands that offers rest, adventure, and programming for strengthening relationships and parenting skills. Let's jump in. Carolina, welcome to Making Business Art. Thank you so much for being on here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward.
So I've been looking for somebody like you with your experience and science lens for like 3 years. So this is like extra exciting for me to finally, find somebody like you who can have the conversation that we're going to have today. So we're going to talk about your background in neuroscience, how you work with teams and facilitation, applying neuroscience to optimize team collaboration, etc., and your own business and university journey. But something I think is very interesting, just to kind of open up the conversation, is that though you're originally from Germany, you moved to the Azores some years ago. So the Azores are like this
Who would do
small,
that, huh?
so it's this more archipelago, I think it's pronounced, of islands off the coast of Portugal. So it's part of Portugal. And so I'm curious, like, what do you enjoy most about living in the Azores?
On an island, I guess going to the beach. Because the island is pretty small. It's, well, I don't know in square meters, but it's like you can drive for 1 hour in one direction and not exactly 1 hour to the other direction from the middle. But it's very kind of thin. So you're always like 15 minutes, or no, we're like yeah, not even 15 minutes to the North Beach and not even 15 minutes to the South Beach. So that's
Mhm.
pretty nice. I guess that's what I enjoy most.
So it's the beach and everything's close. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's kind of, so we got here because my partner is a passionate surfer. And then just some coincidences and COVID, and suddenly remote work was possible. And here we are. And yeah, what's actually nice is everything is really close, but you still have, because like the Azores, they didn't used to have, there were always flights here, but they were really
Mhm.
expensive, and kind of Ryanair just got here 7 years ago or 8 years ago, and that really transformed the
Mhm.
accessibility of the island and made it less remote, because it's really far from Portugal. It's basically in the middle of
Mhm.
the Atlantic almost. And so there's like so much is being constructed. The island has been changing so rapidly.
Mhm.
So when a friend of mine who's 40 and a little bit, when he was I think when he was a child, there was no electricity on Sunday mornings because the person from the electricity company was at the church too. And so this is
Wow.
40 years ago or 35. I think it's from when he was a child, yes. And so it's really at the same time completely remote and
Mhm.
far from everything and small, but also very vibrant. Like lots of people are
Mhm.
coming here and discovering it and moving
Yeah.
here. There's a huge expat community, and that's quite unique.
And I was reading that the temperature is pretty stable more or less throughout the year. Like it doesn't fluctuate very much, right? Is that true?
Yes and no. It's a subtropical island, and kind of it doesn't get much colder than 12 degrees, and it doesn't really get
Celsius.
warmer than, yeah, Celsius, obviously.
Just for,
I'm
yeah.
European, I am. Yeah, so
Yeah.
12 degrees Celsius, and it doesn't get
Hmm.
warmer than 30. Just with the
Right.
humidity that's often close to 100%, it does feel quite different, yes.
Nice. All right. Well,
Yeah.
let's get into it. So one of the first questions I ask to frame just your background is where do you work and what do you help your clients accomplish?
hmm So I've been freelancing and working with a small agency that I co-founded for the past, well, more than 10 years. And so my background is in neuroscience research. And then after my postdoc, I switched basically completely to coaching, team coaching, leadership coaching, and kind of anything in related to strategic innovation. So
Mhm.
that kind of in this realm. And so usually what I help them achieve my clients varies, of course, depending on what they exactly need, but it always has to do with kind of helping innovation or creative teams work together better, accomplish their projects better, or also kind of when it's more from the consulting side, also look into how to set up, yeah, innovation projects, how to set up the teams, things like this. And yeah,
Right.
and leadership coaching, then it's again about team coaching, but it's more with one
Mhm.
person.
Yeah. Well, so you bring a unique science-backed lens to your work since you earned a PhD in social neuroscience. So first of all, just to define terms for everybody, including myself. So what exactly is social neuroscience?
So neuroscience is basically this huge field of kind of three very different types of work that you can do. You can work in a wet lab with cells, with rodents, well, even with monkeys. That's even again different. But so kind of the whole cell biology, this type of stuff. Then you can be very computational, so you're
Hmm.
only with your computer and it's only computational neuroscience. Or you can be in the fMRI, EEG, so you're imaging people, a kind
Hmm.
of neuroscience. That's kind of the methods that you can work with. And then you can look at different cognitive functions or and kind of the social neuroscience is looking at all of social cognition, kind of trying to understand how does social cognition function, what are the underlying mechanisms.
Yeah, I
Um,
noticed as I was preparing for this and looking at lectures, etc., that you were presenting, lots of people with lots of these caps with like many electrodes on the caps. So I guess a lot of brain measurements. So I also noticed that for your PhD, you focused on neural dynamics of teamwork. So what does that term mean for, again, for a lay audience, including myself? And what do you remember being your most meaningful or significant takeaways from your research?
So basically, let's put it like this, neuroscience or imaging, so looking into people's brains. Originally, in the beginning of neuroscience, it was more looking at brain areas. So kind of this area does this area does that. And then that shifted already, I don't know, a couple of decades ago to more looking at networks. So now it's all about
Mhm.
networks, which networks are doing what. And they're distributed in the brain. They also have, of course, localizations, but they're not so
Mhm.
refined to one region. And so for me, the dynamics or networks of teamwork and team interaction, what was I was interested in because I was coming from
Mhm.
neuroscience, so studying some kind of brain dynamics. And then already I had started working as a facilitator, so I was really interested in teamwork and how what makes good teamwork and what happens in the brain when teams work together well.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Was there any learning or takeaway from doing your thesis, your PhD thesis that you found surprising or just very meaningful?
Yeah, I mean I totally found surprising. I started working so in hyperscanning. That's why you've seen these pictures with very
Mhm.
many electrodes. So measure two people's brain activity at the same time using EEG. So you measure the small electrical or weak electrical currents that come to
Mhm.
the surface. And
Mhm.
then you see what you do when you hyperscan people, you see, okay, how are those synchronized between
Mhm.
participants? Like, do people that interact actually synchronize in their brains? Like, are you really on the same wavelength, literally, when you do something together?
Mhm.
And when I started my PhD, there had been some hyperscanning stuff that had shown, yes, wow, when people work together or when people do something together more, like drum together, play
Mhm.
guitar together, something like this, then their brains synchronize. And the big question at the time for me was, okay, is this only driven from doing the same thing at the same time, seeing the same thing at the same time, or does it really have to do something with social interaction and collaboration?
Mhm.
And what I found in especially one experiment was that it really does have to do with performance. So that
Mhm.
teams that perform better are differently synchronized than those that don't perform as well. And
Mhm.
that for me was really something, yeah, something really surprising and yeah, something that I think
Mhm.
can influence a lot the way we think about facilitation. So I think it does
Yeah.
have very concrete applications.
Yeah. So teams, so this is really interesting just to kind of like land the point, or like just let's double down on that point that when teams are performing well, there is like a physical, measurable manifestation of
Mhm.
happening, occurring in the body, in the brain, and I assume probably in other parts of the body as well.
Mhm.
That's super interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
that was,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there was just
Yeah.
recently a research study done that kind of looked at so they had people do like a task that is very common for team creativity. So alternative use, I think you're usually supposed to find alternative usage for brick.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at how many alternative usages does the team find
Mm-hmm.
and say, okay, this is a very creative team, whereas this team is not as creative. And this is a task that has been used in psychological and teamwork research for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. And so they used this task and hyperscanned the people. And what they found was that, yes, the teams that were more creative in the
Mm-hmm.
alternative use cast had higher synchronization between their brains. It was even groups of four. And what was even surprising is that one was it I think group identity is something that has been often proven in psychology
Mm-hmm.
to determine team performance. And they showed that actually kind of the interbrain synchrony is more sensitive than the group identity to predict the performance. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
very physical thing that has some implications. And I mean, bodily synchronization, so in your arm movement or your mimics or everything, is very prevalent when people interact. So you do have kind of synchronization on very many levels, but yeah, you also have it in the brain and it's related to
Interesting.
performance.
Yeah. When I interviewed our common friend Adam Lawrence a couple of years ago, he had this lens. He comes from the world of theater and comedy, and he's a pretty fantastic person. I really enjoy just talking and
It's
learning
really
from
cool.
Adam. Yeah, he is. So he was telling me about we were kind of touching on this, and he was telling me of the collective breath, which is a term, I guess, from theater. I hope I'm getting the term right, where the audience kind of just goes, when something happens in a play. And I was sharing how I had come across some like more like pop psychology articles on or like pop psychology magazines are mentioning research done by I think different teams around the heartbeat synchronization when people are watching a theater production or like a music production or something, or sometimes participating in something together. I thought that was really fascinating, but then I just wasn't aware with the neuroscience work that you're bringing up. So I think it's like maybe brain and heart. I don't know. Did you ever come across anything having to do like heartbeat?
I mean, there was actually even a hyperscanning brain study
Hmm.
on choirs where they found that the heartbeat synchronizes and the breath. I think the breath in choir is not too surprising because that's kind of what defines a choir.
Right.
But yes, the heartbeat synchronizes too. And I
Yeah.
think heartbeat synchronization is very prevalent whenever you have people do something together for longer.
Hmm.
Yeah, like having them do an extended. So yeah, it's definitely not that it just happened once. It's a
Yeah.
finding that, yeah.
I mean, what I just find really fascinating about that is that it really suggests and asks us to think about how social human beings are, right?
It's actually
That our nervous system will do that, will sync up with other people around us when we're doing something together. That's amazing.
when I looked at kind of the most recent studies and at some things that I've done in the past
Hmm.
when I prepared for our podcast, and there
Hmm.
was one thing I'd forgotten about, but it's so nice. And it's just exactly what you're saying. There's
Hmm.
this theory, I forgot the like social default, but it's called different. I can look it up. But kind of the idea behind is that our brains and our bodies
Hmm.
evolve for an environment where other humans are present. So
Yeah.
kind of where for us it's the natural default is that it's social. It's not that we're isolated, but that there are
Hmm.
people around us. And that you have like kind of many things like oxytocin release, or when you're stressed and there's another person close that you yeah feel close to, or side, it
Hmm.
immediately reduces your level of anxiety. It reduces your amygdala activation, everything. And it seems to be that it's really the case. No, it's not like a plus. So kind of,
Hmm.
oh, great, there's another person. So it helps to reduce stress, but it's more that kind of, this is our default. Like this is what we're meant to be around. And then it makes sense that we're easily synchronizing with others because we're kind of, our default is there's somebody to synchronize with.
Yeah. Well, I'm based in the United States, and the culture here leans more towards individualism and like this rugged individualism. But I think really our superpowers, as many others have pointed out before, is collaboration. I mean, that's really where humanity can really shine as a species, a organism here on Earth, and soon enough elsewhere, once we get rockets or whatever else going. So it's just so interesting to be able to have access to like the science, to like, well, what's happening inside the body in our organisms when we're collaborating. So it's not that would be like solely the domain of like like social science interpretation or like chalk it up to culture. Like that's there and has an influence, but there's like this fundamental biological wiring that really suggests that we are built for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at
Yeah.
infant studies, or then it's so obvious that also we're
Hmm.
so lost on our own in the beginning that if we weren't social, it just wouldn't work. And kind of away from the biological, yeah, like there's so many biological functioning so that I really that you can see that we are social and that make a difference in collaboration and all of this. But I think what's really important to note, because I'm not sure everybody is aware of this, is that in kind of in the research field where it's like what is this unique human capability that distinguishes us from great apes, I think the most influential theory is still that of shared intentionality, which is kind of the
Hmm.
basis of collaboration, that we as
Hmm.
humans are interested in doing things with other humans just for the sake of doing them together. This is
Hmm.
nothing that monkeys or great apes do. They do things together and they
Hmm.
definitely show empathy and stuff like this. But this doing things just for the sake of doing them with the others is something
Yeah.
very uniquely and profoundly human.
Yeah.
And
Well,
yeah, and
I
that's
think,
so cool.
yeah, bonobos are known for liking to have a good time, but we won't touch on that today. Let's keep this family friendly for now. So obviously, it's very abundantly clear by now that you're like very passionate about facilitation and teamwork and applying the science to that. What inspired you to pursue like that lens of teamwork in your studies specifically? Where did that come from for you?
So when I studied neuroscience, I studied neuroscience because I actually started off with medical biology, kind of interested in how the body works. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, actually, I'm interested in how the brain works. Like, kind of, it felt to me like everybody's already known about the body. The only thing that isn't really known is the brain. And so I switched to neuroscience. And then in neuroscience, I did my bachelor thesis on deception, which I think is also deception and decision making. But at the time, I got really interested in sleep and consciousness, which are also
Oh.
linked.
Mm-hmm.
And then consciousness was the one that fascinated me most. And I did my master thesis on consciousness. I was also planning to do a PhD on consciousness. I still think consciousness is an amazing topic, especially now with AI. It's got a
Yeah.
whole new twist to it again. But at the time that like AI wasn't on the horizon that much. And I felt like consciousness is this theoretical construct that's totally interesting. It's kind of the only real application it has is coma. And other than that, you're stuck with the theoretical
Mm-hmm.
questions, which are interesting. But I just after finishing my master and before starting my PhD, I stumbled into design thinking just by coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really enjoyed, so I studied at the School of Design Thinking. And then because I enjoyed it so much, and I get asked if I wanted to become a coach, and I'm like, sounds amazing. So I started, and then I did more and more coaching and team facilitation work. And I realized
Mm-hmm.
that I just love to work with people, and this is kind of what I really enjoy, and yeah, what
Yeah.
I wanted to continue. And then I was like, okay, why am I doing a PhD in consciousness if I want to work with people? And so but I was still really interested in neuroscience. And so I'm like, why don't I just pursue a PhD in social neuroscience?
Mm-hmm.
And since teamwork was the thing that fascinated me most, I said, okay, interesting. Everybody studies social interaction, but nobody studies teamwork. So I should do that. And so this is what made me,
Yeah. And
yeah.
then in the spirit of defining terms, again, if there's a listener that maybe is not very familiar with the team design thinking, can you just kind of say what that is?
So design thinking is basically, yeah, you call it a method or a mindset to
Mm-hmm.
develop innovations in terms of innovation in terms of service design, product design, or even process design, and
Mm-hmm.
basically relies on interdisciplinary teams and that to give them kind of a shared language, a shared process that is very iterative and human-centered to come up with novel solutions.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So you've done all these studies and you've done work around, kind of you brought your studies into your career. I'm just curious if there are any common misconceptions or ineffective practices that you have commonly encountered related to like teamwork and facilitation, I suppose, like in organizations, right?
I think one of the, like, especially looking from my neuroscience lens, the most common mistake, or put it like this, is one that's very well known. It goes in the direction of groupthink, kind of that you're relying too much on, oh, teamwork is so great and the team, everything, everybody has to
Mm-hmm.
agree and we have to find consensus. And because if you look at synchronization studies or in hyperscanning studies, you find that, well, synchronization is good in team performance, but depending on the task. If you want to come up with creative solutions, then you need
Mm-hmm.
desynchronization. Like the more creative teams will show more desynchronization at times. And this is kind of thought to reflect that if you're only working together, you're just going in one direction for your solution. Whereas if partly you're desynchronizing and you're going in your direction of thoughts
Mm-hmm.
and I going in my direction of thoughts, then we can create later, if we integrate it, something really novel. And so,
Yeah.
kind of this mix of desynchronization and synchronization is
Mm-hmm.
really what drives very creative and well performing teams. And I think often in organizations, especially if you have like a culture that discourages in the end risk taking and the mistakes that come with it, then you more and more go into the direction of hyper synchronized teams that come up with solutions, but they're not so novel.
Yeah. So definitely I'm hearing, and this tracks to just my lived experience doing design thinking, facilitation, etc., that there's different modes, right? Different modes of working in collaboration. But then I think part of the skill there is knowing when to switch to
When,
what mode and why,
yes,
right? So
I
you
think
have to have that
absolutely.
wisdom. Yeah.
And I think this is part of why design thinking as such is a helpful tool. Because if you go through the different phases, there is
Hmm.
a bit of this inherent, and with this idea of, okay, you just stop your phase at one point and move on to the next.
Yeah.
And you kind of make people more synchronized, more desynchronized, I guess, and
Yeah.
switch modes.
Yeah. And I think I'm also going to invoke Adam Lawrence here again, where he speaks, I think, on behalf of many of us who are very irritated when what I'm hearing you also say is that design thinking can be effective in a neuroscience through a neuroscience lens if you're practicing it in a way that's conducive to get those results. But many times some people just, they do like a brainstorm with sticky notes and they say we're doing design thinking, but then they're not necessarily being very knowledgeable and intentional about, okay, we need to go into different modes of work and when to
Hmm.
introduce, when to change modes and why, and changing
Hmm.
materials. Because it's not just the mode means how people are interacting, but also the materials that you're using, how you're using your body in specific moments, etc. So just to make the point that design thinking can be effective if we know what we're doing, but if we're just doing, I want to say imitation, but that's probably not the right word.
Yeah,
If
just do like.
if we just want to play with sticky notes, that's not.
That's not the way. There's
Yeah.
like to add to this, they're really cool cognitive social neuroscientists. I think they're really
Hmm.
great people. Badwa Barami is one who works in Munich, and he has done so. He has nothing to do with neuroscience and design thinking. I'm not sure he's ever heard of the term, but what he looks at is kind of when diversity is good and when teamwork is good. Like when, because there's often this conception, you just need a diverse team and you put it on any problem and yay. But kind of he looks at the conditions you need for diversity and diverse teamwork to be successful and to be better than individual work. And there are many situations where it's not the case. And one is if your task isn't complex, there's no need. Like you don't need a
Hmm.
diverse team. You don't even need a team. You only waste time because you have this coordination effort that you have whenever you have a team. Like you have to coordinate, to integrate, to synchronize. But if you don't have a complex task to solve, or if your solution space isn't really open, then yeah,
Yeah.
just don't do it.
Yeah.
And I think this, especially in organizations, is, well, it's often not the case.
Yeah. Well, we'll circle back to this point later, but I just want to flag the point that I'm hearing from what you're sharing, but like through the lens of my own lived experience, that I think what you're saying points to the benefits of having a facilitator who really knows what they're doing because a very skilled facilitator is going to know how to create that container, that space for people to and kind of guide people in collaborating in some way. So know that Because I always think of facilitation as an invitation. You're inviting people to do something, but knowing how to shape that environment and how to shift the modes of work back and forth, I think that does take some experience and some skill.
I think from kind of looking at the like my own facilitation experience
Mhm.
and thinking about kind of the neuroscience lens, I think the facilitator also has like a is like some kind of a leader, but not in a way that, so this is the solution, go in this direction, but that is
Mhm.
skill. There's differences in what in neuroscience is called natural, I think in all literature, natural leaders, but there's also brain differences in teams that have, that was an interesting study. So teams that had either kind of natural people that had like high broker people who know like very many different people and connect them. So they were very central in their real life social networks. And when these people were in a team, the teams performed pretty well on average, and they were pretty synchronized. And kind of the
Yeah.
synchronization was often driven in a very interesting way from these people with high centrality,
Mhm.
because it wasn't that them kind of everybody synchronized to them, but
Mhm.
they apparently are very flexible and adapting to other people, and kind of they synchronize to others first. And that's what's been shown in leader follower relationships in neuroscience. First, the leader kind of synchronizes with the follower. So you tune in, you listen, you're flexible in adapting to this other person. And then in
Mhm.
return, kind of the follower starts
Yeah.
following you in synchronization and behavior.
Yeah. So let me linger on this for a moment. I didn't intend to, but since we're on it, then what are the similarities and or differences between like facilitator and a coach, just to parse terms?
Oh,
Or do you think it's pretty close, like almost the same thing? What are your thoughts?
so I think for me, it's more a terminology. I don't know,
Okay.
like a facilitator is someone who's supposed to, yeah, open that space,
Mhm.
give the right space to the people. Because kind of in the study that I was just mentioning, the other kind of extreme that they found were a
Mhm.
person with very high status,
Mhm.
who
Mhm.
kind of did exactly the opposite happened. Like the person challenged the other person's ideas in terms of like really, or says, okay, I'm fine with it, instead of saying, oh, that's a great idea, what kind of the
Mhm.
high centrality person says. So I think a facilitator opens the space by being kind of leveling out status, giving everybody the same room to speak. And yeah, and I think, I mean, maybe you can say a coach is someone who helps you more with methods or with knowledge and points you more in a direction that a facilitator does. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
to me, it's more a terminology than a.
Yeah. So what are based on your learnings and your observations, what we've talked about so far, like what are two or three initial steps leaders or teams can take to break unhelpful habits that we've been talking about and start embracing better practices for teamwork? What are two or three like fundamental 101 things that a leader or a team should like be aware of and think about and implement?
I think in practical terms, it's very different if you're starting off with a new team, or
Hmm.
if you have a team that is already,
Mm,
there are already some problems.
yeah.
And so I think if you come start off with a fresh team, the more like your kind of only aim is to create a psychological safety, because everything else comes with this and everything else is linked to this in my understanding. If you kind of create, and that's also I think was really interesting, because in this one research study that I just alluded to, where kind of the high centrality people happen, yeah, somehow created high synchronization, high performance in their teams. And what they did was encourage others, kind of make the space open. Okay, so far what I understand is this and this, which invites people to add their points. And then they were using language that actually the people were speaking about a controversial movie scene and had to come to a consensus about this movie scene. And they used terms like, oh, that's a fucking weird movie. Or I think this is very weird what they did. And so kind of more casual language and more, yeah, opening the room for others to not feel ashamed. Yeah. And I think this is really something of establishing a very trustworthy atmosphere where the others
Mhm.
feel like, oh, I'm supposed to express something. They summarize and they're waiting for the others' contributions. And they also kind of set the stage. They showed already that it's okay maybe to make a bad joke, or so taking shame from the others.
Yeah.
I think this is really a very fundamental thing And then kind of we've talked before when we were like talking about what are interesting topics for the podcast about the topic of trust. And so trust is something that's been shown in
Mm,
organizational research literature.
mm,
It's a main factor that determines team effort. And there's also trust, definitely trust has a neurobiological component that's very strong. And for example, oxytocin is a hormone that has directly been shown to regulate trust behavior. So if you administer nasal oxytocin to someone, they will be more cooperative and trusting,
mm,
specifically more socially trusting in kind of economic games. And it's
mm,
not general, but it's really social trust that is facilitated. And also the more trust you have, the better it's in the long term. That was actually one of the really interesting takeaways from the study with the movie scenes, that if you kind of create the synchronization in your team, and trust has also been shown to show synchronization, you will have more synchronization and more consensus in later movie scene watching. So kind of it holds for the future if the people, if really everybody in your group doesn't say, oh yes, I think that's a good idea, if they really accept it. And then they put forward the hypothesis, but that in the teams with a kind of high social leader, the people kind of accepted it,
mm,
but privately, within, they weren't convinced. And so synchronization was lower
mm.
overall in the team. And
Interesting.
also their
Okay.
future performance was different. So
Mm,
it doesn't help if you're in an organization, in your team, you're kind of dictating, and everybody says, oh, we're fine. And yes, but privately, internally, they're not
mhm.
engaged and they don't agree and they're not on board. You will have worse performance in the future. So it's really worth investing into this kind of initial establishment of trust in teams, because it lasts for the future. It lasts in your
Yeah.
brains, it lasts in your bodies, it lasts in your performance.
Yeah, but it also has to be genuine because otherwise then people get wise, like you're saying, get wise to like, yeah, I don't believe this or I don't trust it. So it has to be
Yeah.
authentic at some level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I kind of this active listening to others and tuning in and
Mm,
behaving different with different people. That is authenticity. That
yeah.
is, you're not supposed to say, okay, now I'm trying to synchronize everybody, but tune in to your team, and that will
Mhm.
create synchronization and that will be
Yeah.
genuine.
Yeah. So, I mean, just for anybody listening, I think it's, I mean, I'm fascinated by the topic that of trust and prosperity and how they're correlated. And I think if we just think about stock markets around the world, right, where there's trust begets confidence. When there's confidence, then the stock market goes up. When
Hmm.
there's low confidence that something's going to work out, stock markets come crashing down. Like it's very emotional as much as they want to make it
Hmm.
about math. I'm like, no, it's about human psychology largely. Or I heard somebody who labels themselves a neuroeconomist just kind of do like a short talking head video some years back about how even the levels, general levels of trust in countries are also correlated to the prosperity of the countries. So he was saying like in
Mm.
Nordic countries, it tends to be like higher trust. It's just generally more prosperous. In some other countries where trust is very low, maybe there's authoritarian leaders like you were pointing out in some way, the trust is lower. There's less transaction, there's less trust.
Mm.
Prosperity is like a lot lower. It's a really interesting topic, and it's just so interesting to hear it with the lens that you're bringing to it about like just teamwork, like in a specific team. But I think there's also more macro discussions to be had around that.
Yeah, I
Um,
was just thinking of something what we said before, because now I remembered the term, because I found
mhm,
that so fascinating. This public compliance or this private acceptance, that you can kind
mhm,
of see in
mhm,
that brain synchronization is a marker of public compliance where this private acceptance, and you see it has performance implications for the future.
mhm,
And you see that kind of leadership style impacts it directly.
mhm.
And yeah, and I think it's just so fascinating that you can see in the brain of a group of people whether they're privately accepting or only publicly complying. And you can predict how they will perform later. I think that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, we will come back to your current work in a little bit, but I'd like to jump into the time machine and rewind and go back to parts of like somebody's career journey. So you have just spent almost 12 years as a lecturer at the Hasso Plattner Institute. So again, for defining terms, can you tell us what the Hasso-Plattner Institute is? And what
Mhm.
were the common topics that you covered in your teaching while you were there?
So let's say the Hasso-Plattner Institute is part of the University of Potsdam and just, I think, received the largest donation ever done in
Mhm,
Europe from Hasso-Plattner, who's
mhm,
the co-founder of SAP
mhm,
and who's really interested, or who has been really interested in kind of, I think, initially motivated also by driving education for SAP. But
mhm,
I think now also just motivated by education, and kind of who set up this institute and then made it larger and larger. So it's a software institute generally,
mhm,
but then there's the School of Design Thinking, which the SAP, the Hasso-Plattner Institute has become most famous for also, or maybe
mhm,
not most, but very. And the School of Design Thinking is a sister institute of the Stanford School of Design Thinking, which was like the
mhm,
founding cradle of design thinking.
mhm,
And yeah, so the Hasso-Plattner Institute works with students and executives alike and with research. So there are student programs on design thinking, there's research on design thinking, and executive education programs on design thinking.
yeah. And then what were the most common things that you taught that you lectured on while you were there?
Well, I was kind of throughout the 12 years involved in the
Mhm,
student education program and also like every now and then in the executive programs in the kind of design thinking coaching program. And yeah, and I was always working as a team. So kind of all lecturers are team coaches and lecturers. And so yeah, I was always coaching student teams through projects with project partners, all kinds of topics. And then I think I lectured more. Then was also part of the neurodesign initiative, which kind of
mhm,
really tried to bring insights from neuroscience, connect them
mhm.
to yeah, design work. There's also lots of work on Stanford on this. So I lectured on neurodesign and yeah.
Cool. So I'm hearing just to get a clearer lens of the demographics that you were encountering. So when I hear executive programs, that to me tells me these are like working adults. They're like career adults, right? That are coming maybe mid-career or plus or minus mid-career, a little younger, a little more senior.
So the executive programs, there are some that last kind of months, but
Yeah.
there are many that last that are shorter workshop programs, so four
Mm,
days or something like this.
okay.
So you have really all levels of career.
Mhm.
You have
Yeah.
CEOs of companies coming too.
Did you also have more like traditional age college students, or like late teens, early 20s, people that are going through their first leg of university?
They are going through the student program. So in the student
Okay.
program, you have everybody from like nobody has to have done something before. They have to be at least
Hmm.
enrolled in a bachelor and I don't know, be
Hmm.
in the second, third year. Or they already have a bachelor, had worked, are now in a master's, or they're already PhD students. So all kinds of students from a little bit of experience. That's the
Yeah.
student
Yeah.
program. And you
Yeah.
even sometimes have people that worked for quite a while and became a student later on again, like an MBA
Right.
student kind of.
Right.
You also have sometimes these in the program. So it's very mixed student demographics and very mixed
Hmm.
executive demographics
Yeah.
in the other
Yeah. I just wanted
program.
to clarify the cross section of the demographics that you were encountering, because I'm just setting this up for the pattern recognition questions that are coming your way here.
Mm.
So, with that in mind, were there concepts or practices that segments of your audience found challenging to embrace and practice, especially maybe the career adults that already have some ingrained ways of being and working?
So I think two things popped immediately into my mind, kind of ambiguity when you're like in the situations where
Hmm.
nobody really does what to do, where to go,
Hmm.
and also kind of where you have to learn as a facilitator. You also don't have a clue, like nobody
Yeah.
knows, and to not get freaked out by this. I think this is one thing that many people struggle with. Another thing that I've often seen, also, I think in the beginning in myself, that's why I can relate a lot. And I've also specifically worked with groups of scientists only. So we've
Hmm.
also, in the executive program, we sometimes had, yeah, special workshops just for scientific projects. And yeah. And I think scientists generally are very opposed to this. Okay, but why the hell are we working on something with a group of people that have no idea from what it's expertise? Why are we so on the
Hmm.
surface? And I think even and they're right to some degree. It's really this,
Hmm.
okay, at what point is design thinking helpful and when is it not? But yeah, I think they're often sometimes stuck in a very deep and theoretical
Yeah.
perspective, and especially that doing a stupid prototype and they're like, what the hell is this supposed to help? And sometimes they're right. Like it doesn't
Hmm.
advance the solution as such, but maybe it has more an impact on team dynamics and on atmosphere, and later on the benefits will follow. And I think the balance between kind of sometimes having, especially scientists, that's very challenging, let's say workshop participants that really point out the weak points where maybe this exercise didn't help. And at the same time, the openness to, yes, it helps, but you're right, it doesn't help now, but the purpose is later. I think, yeah, that's a very
Yeah.
interesting challenge that I've kind of seen repeated.
Specifically with scientists, I think there are people that fall into scientism, which is kind of this dogmatic kind of they get locked into dogmatic ways of thinking. But the I think what one of the other phenomena was with scientists which is ironic, is that there's so much discovery and innovation that comes from accidents, that comes
Yeah.
from like randomness and somebody just noticing. Like famously, I forget because I forget my facts now, but the person who say came up with antibiotics, like they just
Hmm.
noticed that like, oh, this thing is growing over here, like what's going on? Or like a number of medicines or a number of other
Hmm.
innovations. There's like some accident and somebody just noticed something and got curious. But so there's rarely this, not rarely, let me take that back, but there's not always this straight path like, oh, I have a theory and then I prove it, I disprove it, and then there's this result or this answer, because that to me, at least in the social sciences, especially like with international development work where they really like to have a theory of change,
Hmm.
I just personally find that a little arrogant, because then that suggests that that person
You
has
know.
this omniscience that they know how everything is going to work. And the world is just so complex and chaotic that if we're really honest, most of us are just making it up as we go along. Like, you know
Hmm.
what I mean?
Is
Like
I was just thinking,
we honor people's work and scholarship and the time that they invest in something, but there's just so much that we don't know. And so I think just being kind of aware and awake to what's emerging and then just noticing and getting curious.
yeah.
I think so much goodness has come out of that for humanity, and I think it's so valuable and helpful to embrace that. But anyway, so I'm kind of on my soapbox here. But so you're saying that the ambiguity is something that, especially the more adult career people, find very challenging
Oh, also the
to embrace at
students.
times.
And let me just add to what you were just saying
Mm,
before, because I totally agree
mm,
with that, that
mm,
things come out of discovery, comes out of mistakes, and you don't know, and
yeah.
things don't work at first. It's the same with scientific paper. When you read them, they always
Mm,
seem so, yeah, so we did this experiment and those are the results and super straight out of the hat, but this is
mm,
not how it works. And so in science, like you have your hypothesis, you run your experiment, then you do the analysis, and then it doesn't work. You're like, you don't find a result. But
mm,
that's what kind of every scientist, no, you can't. So there's changes. But especially when I was doing my PhD, you can't publish null findings. Like they're not publishable. It's very honest. Sometimes you don't
mm,
find what you were hypothesizing, but you can't publish them. But you need to publish something. So everybody runs other analyses. So you're like, oh, what else could I analyze?
mm,
And then you find, but this works. So even in things that look super straight, it's
yeah.
so often a trial and error thing and finding
Yeah.
out.
Well, and sometimes I think also that culture then lends itself to create incentives for people to, do creative things with data they shouldn't be doing. And then like you end up with bad science that way too.
Yeah,
Because
there's
we're just
lots
human
of
beings, right?
yeah, there's also changed. So there,
Mm,
when I started my PhD, I think that it was new that you pre-register studies. So kind of you're not
mm,
running your studies, analyzing your
mhm,
stuff, and then send it to a journal and they accept or reject it. But
mhm,
you're like, hey, we're gonna do this experiment. This is our idea and this is our hypothesis. And then the journal is either like, oh wow, that's a cool experiment. We already
mm,
accept it, no matter what the results are, or they're like, it's a boring experiment, we don't accept it. And this is something that, for example, was new to exactly prevent people from trying to
yeah.
find results. But yeah, but anyways, at the
Torture,
same
yeah.
time,
Torturing the
yeah,
data, as they say.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, on
Yeah.
the flip side of this, so you're coming in contact while you're at this institute with people kind of changing, shifting ways of being, embracing new
Oh,
things.
yes.
Was there ever a time you saw someone transformed, be it professionally or personally, by the practice of these skills?
Me? And so
You
myself,
yourself?
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and kind of
How
many,
so? So
I think
what was the
very many people.
yeah, what was the transformation
Um,
for you individually since you called yourself out there first?
I mean, so yeah, so first of all, the one thing was professionally that I walked into the program as kind of a neuroscience PhD student, and then
Mm,
I basically walked out of the student program as an design thinking coach, innovation consultant. So
mhm,
quite a transformation already. And then, for example, I met my partner also there who walked
mhm,
in as a lawyer and who came out as an innovation consultant, kind of. And so
mhm.
I've seen this with many people happen in kind of all kinds of
Yeah.
directions. And yeah, this, and then I think for me, one of the, I think the biggest personal transformation that when I went into the program, yeah, I think I still thought that I have a pretty good idea sometimes of things, and that my idea is really good, and
Okay.
my idea is the best one kind. And that I realized, well, there's never like this one best idea, but you can have several ideas that are really good. And yeah, you choose one kind of. One is better than the other, but it's not this perfect idea doesn't exist ever. And yeah, I think this kind of when you have that's quite a shift in mindset when you work with a team, for example, because
Mm.
either you kind of think that you know better than the others, or you're like, okay,
Mhm.
everybody's different. Let's see.
Yeah,
So
for
yeah.
sure. I think acquiring that humility is very helpful. And we can talk about it. We can talk about it, but when you're in the room and like these urges bubble out of you of like feeling or being right and like checking yourself, I think that's definitely a muscle that we need to develop. I mean, I'm not above thinking that my idea I love to be right, but often unfortunately I'm not.
A friend of mine I think it was, yeah, it
Mm,
was somebody from the D School in Potsdam in Stanford who, I don't know if she coined the term, but from there I know it.
mhm.
Strong opinions weakly held. And she said
Yes.
that I am a person of strong
Yeah.
opinions weakly held. And I think this is like a
Nice.
super helpful, you can have a strong
Hmm.
opinion and then like, okay, so if nobody else agrees, well, then not.
Yeah.
Or, oh, that's counter evidence. Okay, then not.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Rory Sutherland? He works for Ogilvy. He talks
No,
about
for
behavioral
what?
science.
I'm not, he
Yeah,
works for?
he for Ogilvy, he's in podcasts all the time.
Okay.
He shows up in a lot of interviews. He's written I think a couple of books. Is one of his more recent books, at least the US version is called Alchemy. I think in Europe the title was a little bit different. But he's a proponent of the psychological solution, right? He talks about like say like why would you spend billions of euros or dollars or whatever making a train go like 10 minutes faster while you can just make the experience of being on the train so much better for like a fraction of the cost that the time of the
Hmm.
train doesn't really matter because people won't really
Yes.
and so something that he says in one of his principles of these things is he points out how the opposite of a good idea can also be a good idea, and I'm like, huh. And then in my own entrepreneurial journey I found that you can get some really good advice and you're like, yes, that's true. And then the opposite of the good advice, it's also true. But it makes me think of
That's
like, okay,
nice.
if you open a restaurant or a bar, right, you want to like advertise it and market it and let it be known.
Or,
And,
yeah.
and I used to work across the street in Washington when I lived in Washington, D.C., from this place that's one of these speakeasy bars that it's secret and nobody knows about
Hmm.
it. And you have to find out the
Hmm.
number and you have to call in a reservation, like just
Hmm.
knock on some on this in
Hmm.
the script door and they kind of
Hmm.
let you in. And so, and it was packed. Like you could
But
not
you
get a
know what?
reservation there for like weeks. And it's
So
like,
I'm
well,
from
it's,
Berlin.
yeah.
I'm from Berlin,
Hmm.
and the most kind of, I think it was the world's most famous club for quite a while, Berghain, kind of
Yeah.
drove it even further. What made them so famous is they have this
Hmm.
guy at the door that lets nobody in.
Mm.
And people come and wait for 4 hours.
Oh
So
my
it's
God.
crazy. Like the line is insane, but kind of you're 4 hours in the line and you don't know if you're going to make it in because their door policy is so restrictive. But kind of it wasn't even that they didn't advertise it. They were like, no, you don't come in. And
Yeah.
that made them the
So,
most
so I think
successful
that that's
club in the
just to
world.
illustrate the example of like the opposite of marketing is
Yeah.
this, and that can also work really well if you kind of figure out how to execute it.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to pick on your husband there
That's really nice.
for a moment, what would you say was different about him from when you first met him to after he got done with this program and like practicing these things? Was there a way of being that kind of shifted for him? that
Oh,
was
but I didn't know him before so much, so I
okay.
can't, that I can more
You
talk
didn't
about
witness
myself.
that journey, okay.
Let me see if I witnessed the journey for anybody. No, I
Well,
think the
did anybody
journey
ever
mostly
come
for myself.
up to you and share some feedback like, oh, hey, doing this thing has changed me in this way?
Oh, yes. I mean, so yeah, completely. I think really many of our D school students changed their
Mhm.
career. And I mean, that's usually quite a thing. Then, or maybe that's also a nice thing. So I went with a friend, with another colleague coach. She was Brazilian. She lived in Berlin, but so I was planning and then went to go to Brazil with her and with two other girls. And we were together at a dinner. And then somebody was like, okay, so who are you going to Brazil with? And then my friend answers, oh, I'm going with Caroline and Kata and with one non-D school friend. So the term a non-D school friend, there's only one. There's really a strong cohesion and a strong community creation of the people. And they're often like, oh, wow, I finally feel like I found my bunch of people.
Mhm.
And yeah, really kind of people become entrepreneurial, where, for example, that often happened with, I think, with no, I think PhD students, I don't know if it really often happened with them, but for me,
Mhm.
an example of people who sometimes are like, I've only studied, worked in science. I don't know what else to do. And
Mhm.
then they come out of the program like so much more confident and start their own
Mhm.
business. I think especially the entrepreneurial energy transformation. I've seen a lot. Yeah. And yeah, and maybe
Mhm.
trusting a bit kind of the what I said before, that people often have a problem with ambiguity, but
Yeah.
trusting a bit more that even if you don't know, you'll figure it out.
That's a hard one. I
Yeah,
mean,
but I think this is something I'm
yeah.
often seeing in people change.
Yeah. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for, I don't know what it's been now, like 14, 15 years, something like that at this point. So I've built up a lot of tolerance where, if I sometimes I'm in a workshop with somebody who's only been like in corporate, like in a corporate path. And so then I notice the difference, but it's still hard. It's always hard. The ambiguity part, it's always hard. Like we might be doing a workshop with colleagues, and then there might be a moment in the workshop where we're like, oh my God, this workshop is just going sideways. And we just have to say to each other, like, just trust the process, trust the process. And then it smooths out, and then it's like smooth
Mhm.
sailing after some point, and we're like, ah. And then at the end, people are really happy. But that's always a tough one for, I think, for anybody. With a rare, there's always people that, that are very, very comfortable with that. But
Yeah, very
that,
confident in themselves and everything.
that's a rare person. So, I mean, just looking back overall, like what were the most significant lessons you think you took away from your time at Hasselplattner Institute?
No, or
However you want to answer that question. What's most meaningful to
mm,
you? What was the most meaningful lesson you took away? The biggest impact on your life?
yeah, I think the biggest impact of my on my life was really this, that there is not this one perfect solution in anything that you can
Mm,
strive for. I think then I don't know if it's a specific or stronger for coming from a German culture where there's a saying in the southern part of Germany which translates to like it's a funny, nice word for criticizing. So if you don't criticize, that's already praise. And I kind of to see how beneficial it is to kind of encourage people, how much you gain from this, kind of do it constantly, have it integrated in teamwork, have kind of really taking time for team reflections and all of this. Which funnily, kind of, if you look at neuroscience, there's also lots of evidence that says, for example, as if you have like very complex tasks for teams, very high cognitive load, their brain synchronization will drop
mm,
and the performance will also suffer. And kind of if you have very demanding tasks, you're just not as able to recruit kind of the social circuits. So
mm,
you can't focus on social cues, on empathy, on all of this as well. So if you
mhm,
constantly are in high demanding tasks, your team cohesion will slowly erode. And take these time for team reflections. And actually, I think something that I think was one of the most powerful individual tools that I learned at D school is like individual feedback circles where you give kind of written feedback on a post-it and you can take it home. And because I know quite some people from D school where then you're at their house and somewhere they have a box with some of these post-its. I kept some of them too because it's just so nice when you stumble upon them and somebody wrote you this you did well. They also wrote this you need to improve. But yeah, the post-its where it says that you're doing this and this really well are just encouraging again over time. And I think
Mhm.
this was something really nice that I took away. Yeah, and personally, yeah, I think also the my biggest learning as a facilitator was really the first time when I learned I don't need to have the answer. I won't, and I don't need to have. And that sometimes it's better if you just shut up and let them do. And because you always want, oh, and I have a good idea, and I have or you could use this method, or you could point this out, but yeah, but you need to wait for the right moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we'll circle back to this in a moment, but so I also just want to acknowledge that. So along the way, you became a parent and moved to from Germany to the Azores. And by the way, that is not a virtual background. That is the actual
that's my background.
landscape out of your window, right?
More, yes. Actually, it's nice on the other side. The sea is over there.
It's gorgeous to look at. So I'm just curious,
Thank you.
just to have some reflection time here. Like, has
Not if you can
parenthood
see in
or
better. There, get a little bit already.
a little bit of the ocean? Okay. Has parenthood or life in the islands influenced how you think about teamwork and leadership? Like, has that informed that in some way?
Definitely.
So tell.
Definitely, I just have to think about in what way. So let's start with life on the island because that had
Hmm.
one big impact. Actually, I think I said beach in the beginning is the thing that I liked most about the island, but this is something that I dislike and like at the same time. In German, the word is Inselkoller. I don't know if you have
Hmm.
if there's a similar word in English, which means that,
Hmm.
after spending a while on an island, you're just
Hmm.
like, kind of it drives you crazy.
Okay.
And to me, how that felt is
Mhm.
that suddenly the world has an end. Because you always see
Hmm.
the horizon. I mean, that's the sea, but otherwise you also see the horizon.
Hmm.
But this horizon, you can't get there, and there's a boundary around you. And so, kind of, the world feels like it becomes smaller. And at the same time, it leaves you, I think, with less FOMO, fear of missing out, and kind of helps you a way more to understand, like, lots of your life is happening within you, and it doesn't really matter where the outside boundary is. So I think this is really something that
Yeah. Well,
changes when you
also,
live.
I've never visited Berlin or haven't visited Berlin yet, but it's known to be a global city with a lot of culture, a lot going on.
Mhm.
There's just a lot there. And being in an island with a much smaller population, has that, how you get along with and connect and relate to people, has that shifted in some way?
I wouldn't say so. It's made, no, like what's nice here that often people go to the same places, kind of
Mm-hmm.
when there's surf in the north, you meet everybody in the north. You
Hmm.
don't have to make an appointment, but you'll just meet. But that can also happen in Berlin, just because
Yeah.
it's many different villages. Everybody stays in
Hmm.
the area. So you also randomly meet people. And I think what's different here on the island is that you can
Hmm.
really, especially if we have some friends from the island and others kind of foreigners.
Hmm.
And most of the foreigners don't have family here, so kind of you can very much rely on your friends because they need to
Hmm.
rely on you too. So yeah, I think this is a bit what changed, but not really.
Yeah. Well, what about parenthood? So now you're the leader of a pack of little humans. Well, there's two little humans and one on the way, right? And with your
Hmm.
husband. I think parenthood is a challenge for more or less every human being on this planet. It challenges our ego. It's definitely an experience with a lot of intensity to it. Has that kind of influence how you think about teamwork and leadership in some way?
Yes, I think the strongest point maybe that directly translates to leadership is that kind of with the little human beings, it basically doesn't matter what you tell them, it matters what you live. Like you're the
Mm,
example, they will copy. And if you
true.
tell them to behave differently than you, it just doesn't work. And if you have an outbreak when you're hungry and angry and scream at everybody, then they will too.
Hmm.
Even if
Yeah.
you tell them that screaming isn't good. But yeah, and kind of I think how much this translates to leadership, that it matters so much more how you behave in a team than kind of the orders and strategy you give. That it's great if you're a good
Right.
strategist, but that alone.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like, especially when, well, as adults, but especially when we're children, it's like our nervous system kind of maps onto the other people around us in some way and really shapes
Mm.
our development in a greater or lesser ways, I guess, depends on how much engagement you have with people. I know what do you notice around that?
I think that actually the kind of, yeah, also from the nervous system point, that the most important part, or that emotional connection is such an important part. And I think that's also something that translates to leadership in teams. Like you don't have to be
Hmm.
friends, deep friends with everybody at work, but kind of with kids, I found this a great advice, when your child isn't doing what you want and kind of misbehaving, that it's much more effective to just spend kind of fun times than to
Mm.
scream and punish. Because often kind of the more connected they feel to you, the more
Hmm.
compliant they are. And
Hmm.
and I feel that's true for teamwork too. Like if you have a leader you
Hmm.
like, you want to do things for them. And that doesn't mean you need close friendship, but it means to have an eye on the emotional connection and
Hmm.
emotional kind of state.
Yeah. And I think that also connects what we were talking about trust in teams, right? You're kind of building that account, that bank account of trust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what was the language you use when the trust is like internal, like privately,
Private acceptance.
private acceptance? There you go.
Private acceptance where
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
public compliance.
Exactly. Interesting. Well, that's fascinating. So while we're talking about the Azores and your life there, I also
Mm.
understand. So you started a retreat and learning space for professionals in the Azores, and you're kind of expanding or developing this actively. So tell
Hmm.
what these retreats are about, and what do you help people accomplish in these retreats?
So it's just starting. And the
Mm.
first retreat is actually going to be about parenthood. So it's actually aimed at, yeah, private people more than kind of
Mhm.
organizational. But the whole idea is, I think that kind of in all my work as a team facilitator or leadership coach, my focus always comes from kind of my neuroscience background,
Mhm.
which is on interactions. It's, I think, the most important thing in how a team works and what makes good leadership is how you interact with the others. And so that has to do a lot with relationships too. How you set up, how you maintain relationships, what's important to maintain good relationships, how you manage relationships. And yeah, of course, relationships have a lot to do with couple and families. And so it's actually in kind of another focus that I would like to start because the Azores are in the middle of the Atlantic and people come as private tourists anyways. So kind of the first step is more looking in this direction, kind of as couples and parents. And because I feel like relationships are so predominant in teamwork and in life, but you just have to figure out yourself how they work. While there's so much research on it, and why doesn't somebody just tell you this already? So you have a better, more solid foundation to start from. And so, yeah, that's first the idea to kind of basically relationship holidays for parents, for couples to spend holidays and work on your relationship. And then the next step is kind of to bring organizations here, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. I think, well, I mean, going back to what you were sharing about your time at Hasso-Plattner Institute, I think that there are ways of being that we can learn that are helpful to us and the people around us. And maybe some of us have grown up or developed ways of beings that are not helpful, and maybe we don't have awareness that of how a specific way of being might be interfering with fulfillment of our desires to connect with people or to accomplish something. So I just find that very interesting. I mean, I think it bleeds either way. I'm remembering I having a chat when I recorded with our friend. I don't know if you also know Arna Bonostrom over in Amsterdam. He was remembering a time where he was doing some work with, I think it was some Nordic people, and this gigantic man from Norway. Arna is like 6'5", by the way, and this man substantially larger than him. If you can imagine that, comes up like after a work, like during a workshop, I just hugs him from behind and says like, "My wife loves you." And Arna's like, "What?" And so he was saying that the practice of design thinking kind of is bleeding over to his home life, where he's kind of being more a better listener and more empathic and kind of interacting with his wife in a little bit different way. So he's showing up with a slightly different way of being. And so his home life is being improved through these like corporate things that they were doing for like some innovation project or something.
Nice.
So I think it there's no hard boundary, I think, for the
Yeah.
benefits of what people learn. It flows both ways.
Totally. I think the thing is, and it not only the benefits flow both ways, but also the problems flow both ways. Kind of
Mm,
if you have, it can be so energy draining if you have problems in
mhm,
your relationship, and well, you will have less energy at work if you have less energy. Like it's not that you leave your, well, some people manage to leave their work problems at home already, at work already. That is difficult, but I think it's kind of
mhm.
almost impossible to leave your private problems at your house.
Yeah,
And so that's why I do think that kind of there's this whole trend sound people, but this whole movement and leadership development to focus on self. Like you
yeah,
need to change yourself first to kind of have an impact on others. And I think that kind of relationship skills as one set of that's so important to develop about yourself. I think that's just a huge thing.
absolutely. This reminds me of some hip hop lyrics. I forget what the song is, but check yourself before you wreck yourself. I think that applies.
No, this, but it's nice. Yes.
That
Oh,
applies to this
yes.
conversation. Okay, so coming back to the present day and your work and the neuroscience of teamwork, I want to go over some takeaways that I heard you discuss during a lecture that you gave online
Hmm.
some years ago about how our brain shapes our behavior in teamwork, or brain states, I should say. So the first takeaway you pointed out at the end was to get on the same wavelength. So we've been touching on this in this conversation, but let's package it. So getting on the same wavelength, what does that mean again? And what might be one or two things like specific exercises or warm-ups that, a team or a facilitator can do to kind of get to accomplish that?
Okay, so first, what does it mean? Like in this case, it
Hmm.
really means that brains are entrained in synchrony, like
Yeah.
that your and my brain synchronize when a neuroscientist measures it. And that this has now been really robustly shown to correlate to performance. As I said
Hmm.
before, it depends. Like if your team always is like super high synchronized, they won't be very creative anymore. So it's you have to
Because it's
kind of
groupthink, then it becomes groupthink
exactly,
if it's too
exactly,
much. So you gotta
exactly.
change modes, right? We're kind of covering that
Exactly.
again. Yeah.
Exactly. You got to change
Hmm.
modes. That's really important. And be aware of this, that synchronization. Wherever it is, isn't always better, but you need to be aware. But so it's really something you want kind of your team to be synchronized to have good performance. And it also comes to this is like how well you integrate ideas as a synchronization, yeah, will show higher synchronization. And the easiest way to get there, I think, is really through bodily synchronization. That's also
Hmm.
so that it has been now robustly shown, even if you text, like if you exchange text messages, there's brain synchronization. So speaker listening synchronization is something that's been studied a lot, and it's really about this mutual understanding. If you
Hmm.
have a speaker and a listener that don't share the same language, there will not be synchronization. So it's really about the content and about the understanding, which I personally find fascinating. But yeah, so if you also if and so communication, if even if you have text message exchange, you will see synchronization, but it's lower than face-to-face interaction. So face-to-face
Hmm.
interaction is kind of the where you get the most synchronization. So this means if you work remotely, you kind of need to pay special attention. And it has also been shown
Hmm.
that if you have check-ins, team building activities, that does impact remote work performance. It will be better.
Hmm.
And so I think in general, having this eye of, okay, it's important that my team kind of feels synchronized when this is the mode. And I need to actively do something for this. I think this awareness is step number one. And step number two is do bodily things to synchronize, which
Hmm.
can be stupid warm-ups where you have the Danish clapping game. I don't know if which is my favorite warm-up. It's a warm-up that makes everybody laugh. You have
Okay.
like this, so you have your arms up, your arms to
Yeah.
the side, or your arms to the left. In
Okay.
between, you always clap your legs. So boom,
Okay.
and then you stand in
Yeah.
front of each other and you both
Hmm.
do it like you always clap on your leg and you go up, left or right. And you do it and I do it. And sometimes we happen to mirror each other. And when we
Hmm.
mirror each other, after the next leg clap, we clap together. And it's a warm up
Nice.
where like you have 100% guarantee that everybody will laugh. Like some
Yeah.
people are better at doing it than others, but it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Everybody finds it funny. And this is one that will definitely kind of entrain synchronization because you have bodily movements. What we did before, taking a breath together,
Yeah.
will synchronize. So kind of all these short, especially warm-ups and icebreakers, or yeah, I think this is one. And the other is you can also go in the emotional direction They share stories and everybody listens. And
Hmm.
so you have to focus on the same thing. If you watch a movie
Mm.
together, it will also synchronize your brains because you're focusing on the same content. If you do like
Okay.
a vision building workshop, you focus on the same vision and develop the
Hmm.
same vision, it will lead to synchronization. So kind of those are the
Yeah.
things that I think very common things most people do anyways
I
will
just want
help.
to just kind of push back a little bit on one thing. I don't think it's useful to call it a stupid warm up. I think it's better if we frame it as like there's this neuroscience backed warm up just to build
Then you can
credibility
say it's
because
a
it works.
stupid warm-up, but it's not stupid. There is research that shows that the stupid workup actually warm-up actually
Yeah.
works.
Well, sometimes there are
Um,
things that facilitators do that I do find irritating that are just kind of silly. And I know I have a colleague who's just super effective at like picking the right warm
mm,
up and then
at
they
the
do
right
it
time.
and then they frame it, they do it and then they debrief it and it makes such a
Hmm.
difference and then people really get the point and buy in instead of like rolling their eyes and being like, oh my God, I'm doing this stupid thing. This stupid person's making me do I don't want to be here. So I think it's like you
You
gotta
know what we
sell it.
maybe think?
You gotta sell it.
I think you can, the opposite advice can also be good. Well, is my
I'll
way.
I'll
If
re
it's stupid,
I'll
if it
receive
feels
that.
stupid, just say it feels stupid, but it's still useful. I mean, you don't have to pretend it's not
Yeah.
stupid because some workshops are, some warm-ups are stupid, but that doesn't
Mhm.
mean they're pointless, and you can still explain why you don't have a point. But nobody needs to pretend they're not stupid.
Point
Um,
received and taken. The so I want to move on to the next takeaway that you had, the second one, which is value social focus and emotions. So let's unpack that because I think you were just talking about the group think and where when to change modes from individual tasks to like social tasks. So let's talk about this. So
I
value
think
social focus and emotions. Tell me about it.
my main point about value social
Mhm.
is that what I find interesting from neuroscience research is really this, that the brain has dedicated, well, kind of dedicated circuits, networks for social tasks, like for anything that has to do with social, for a theory of mind,
Mhm.
understanding what how others people feel and think, putting your shoes into the other person, all these kinds of social skills that we have. And they have certain networks in the brain. And these networks, it's not that they can't be active when you're focused on a task, but the more you focus on a task, the more difficult it is to co-activate them at the same time. And so
Mhm.
there's a trade-off. If you really have a very complex task, you just won't be able to, at the same time, use all your
Mhm.
social skills. And so I think this, just to be aware of this, like you can't hold 12 numbers in your working memory at the same time. You can't focus on a complex task and be aware of your team and social dynamics and all of this at the same time. So you need to make room for this. And it will improve your team performance. And I think this is the main reason why, retrospectives are something that are successful and that have been
Mhm.
recognized to be successful and are often in many working processes implemented. But this is really the reason. You
Mhm.
need sometimes to focus on social things because you can't while you're carrying out your tasks.
Right. So what I'm also hearing there is just having the intentionality of going into a mode of like solo work if you're doing an activity like a workshop. So moments of solo work, then you come together, you discuss, you do like a social interaction and just knowing when to shift back and forth.
Yes,
Yeah.
totally also links into this. Yes, knowing when to also, because for example, also teamwork, if you're working as a team, that's actually, it's a really nice thing I think about human cognition is, so you co-represent your teamwork's so your teammates'
Hmm.
tasks. There's very old psychological studies that really show that you co-represent what the other person is supposed to do. You have nothing to do with this. You're just in the same team, and the final goal is your tasks together. Then you automatically co-represent your partner's tasks. And so kind of your cognitive load is always higher, obviously, if you're still thinking of what the other people have to do, even though it doesn't affect you. So that's why sometimes it's really better to say, okay, now it's solo work and you go into separate rooms, you're in separate
Hmm.
places, you just focus on what you're doing. And then there are other times when you work as a team, and then there's again other times when you speak about emotions, things like this.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about emotions and decision making. I'm a little bit familiar with some of the arguments or work from, I think it's Antonio Damasio, as far as how
Mhm.
emotions are very important for decision. And if you can add a little bit of color to that.
Okay, so just kind of what they're think his most famous experiments were so you have a card deck, and then you have to figure out which of two or three card decks is the best one where you win most of the time. And then you figure it out, and then it switches. Another card deck will become the better one.
Mhm.
And kind of what they look is like how fast do you notice that you have to switch? And that's kind of also in real life an incredibly important skill to have to realize like when is the strategy not a winning strategy anymore. And what he has shown is that it's not a cognitive thing, is that not just you just cognitively figure out which one, but I think he measured skin conductance. So it shows you kind of
Mhm.
your arousal, your anxiety level, and that helps you figure out like you kind of your body notices, oh no, we're losing, oh no, we're losing, and kind of signals, and the brain integrates all of these kind of emotional stimuli into decision making, and you're
Mhm.
better if you integrate them. So that's something. I think emotions play a huge role in trust. In
Right.
that way, there's something in the back of my mind, but I can't formulate it where no, it would be a nice example how it's linked to decision making. But the other thing is, for example, how social exclusion is something that we feel very strongly that evokes kind of brain, pain circuits in the brain, and you really feel
Mhm.
hurt. And if you feel like this, you will become also worse in decision making. So basically, if a teammate doesn't feel well because they feel excluded, they feel not wanted, they will become worse in not only decision making, but I think in other things. So it not everybody has to be happy all of the time,
Mhm.
but you have to have an eye out if somebody really doesn't feel well. It's kind of common knowledge, but there's really kind of neurobiological underpinnings why this
Yeah.
person will be affected.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, before we go on to the third takeaway, the third and final takeaway, let's just define terms. Can you just quickly define for our lay audience what is oxytocin?
Well, oxytocin is a hormone, and it's kind of it does other things too, but it's kind of become famous as like the closeness and the connection hormone. So when you have lots of oxytocin in your body, you feel closer, more connected, you trust more the others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the takeaway is oxytocin loves trust and hates stress. So tell me about that for related to teamwork.
Okay, so it's actually if you have just I think it can explain why working in an agency sometimes under time constraint and you have to finish a project
Mhm.
sometimes can be very, also can kind of drive the team to feel very close and work on it. Acute stress even releases oxytocin and kind of you're like, oh, feel closer together. But if you have chronic stress, it
Mhm.
kills you just your oxytocin levels will reduce and people will become less empathetic with each others. For example, decision making will become less well, like you have lots of negative effects. And so stress is really something to watch out for if you have a high level of stress in your team. Kind of, you can expect them to fall apart a bit as a team.
Mhm.
And you can try to counteract this. Like sometimes it's just stressful over a longer period, but be aware that it has deteriorating effects on your teamwork.
Great. Thank you. Well, for my next question, I want to recruit you to help me settle an argument. Caroline.
Okay. With whom? No, it
So
doesn't
I
have.
have with teammates. Just leave it like
Okay.
that. They shall
Hmm.
they shall remain unnamed to protect the innocent. But
Yeah, but that's
um,
what I meant. Yeah. So
yeah,
with teammates.
I have noticed just in my lived experience, my noticing is that so this is about team size. When we're doing a workshop, I've noticed that a team of four, that's a really good number. Now there's a colleague or two that will argue like, oh no, teams of seven is are fine, but I don't think a team of seven works very well. What does the neuroscience say? Help me
Oh,
settle
I
this
can't help
argument
you with
right
the
here.
neuroscience. I can't help you with the neuroscience because especially the whole hyperscanning stuff, or even all of neuroscience has only, when is it? 20 years ago, which
Mhm.
sounds so long, but in neuroscience terms is not
Mhm.
so long, started to look at two people at the same time. And now, so there are groups, there are sometimes classrooms, but there's not been enough studies to
Yeah.
show any differences between like this
Yeah.
and this number of
Well, what
teams.
about in your own lived
But
experience
yeah, in
as a
my own lived
facilitator?
experience, I'm
Yeah.
completely on your side.
Yes.
For me,
Eat it.
for me, it's no, in my own personal experience,
Yeah.
it's team of six is the absolute maximum, but I would even
Yeah,
I
I
prefer
know.
teams of five because I think
Hmm.
six is already too much. And for the main,
Hmm.
the only the reason that I see is People like to talk. People are also supposed to talk. And if there are more than five people, there's not
Yeah.
enough time for everybody to talk. If you
Yes.
have two that remain silent, so the ticks turn into four, it'll be fine.
Agreed.
And I think it depends sometimes on the setup because sometimes you really
Hmm.
have a task where you have a very clear task and you need, for
Hmm.
example, more people to be there because you don't know yet whose input you will need, but it's not about everybody saying something, and
Yeah.
especially not equal amount of things. So I think this is what really determines is if you have a set,
Yeah.
you kind of don't know before who's going to talk, and it's not going to be very long. It might well work with
Hmm.
10, but for real teamwork and project work, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say, let's see your reaction to this. Because once COVID rolled around and we started to do more stuff remote and online, I think online, definitely not more than four people in a breakout room, because then there's definitely not enough time usually for people to really interact and everybody to get
Mm,
their words out. So like 3 to 4 people. I think in person, you can stretch a little bit more, go up to 5 or 6, because there's just in person the bandwidth is a lot higher to like exchange information. So it's also like the awareness of like I found that when we do work remote time is very different than in-person time. It takes
yes.
twice as long or 3 times as long to accomplish something remotely than when we're like doing a workshop in person. And then you can only be on a Zoom call like 2 3 hours and then your
You
brain is
can't be as
fried,
long.
where
Yes,
you can do a
absolutely.
workshop in person that's like 1 or 2 full days. And yes, it's
Yes.
tiring, but it's just again the bandwidth a lot is a lot higher. You accomplish a lot more in the period of time, I think. I don't know.
I
What's
mean, I
what's your
think
take?
it's I'm also biased because I live on an island in the middle of the ocean, so I'm a huge fan of remote work.
Yes.
You always have to know the doctor's favorite
But
diagnosis
as
before
a
you go there.
designer, if you're designing an
Um,
agenda and time
Time is different. Time is
thing,
different,
yeah,
and of course you
yeah,
can't do a whole day workshop online. No.
right, no,
But I think you can use it differently. That like the same thing what you were saying, I think how many people you have in a work in a breakout room depends on what they've done before, how well they know each other, what they're supposed to
yeah,
do. And I also think what can be there are two things that I find are really beneficial in remote workshops. One is when you like go in a Miro where nobody is signed in and you
mm-hmm.
write ideas on post-its. You have no idea who wrote what. And especially in when you have high status people in the group and others, and people will be
Mm-hmm.
afraid to voice their opinion. I think this is amazing because it's hard to do it as anonymous in a room. And the other thing, if we speak of modes of synchronizing and desynchronizing and group work and solo work, this is really beneficial because we have a session for what we want to do as a group, and then you already kind of have scheduled that afterwards, so the workshop ends, the online time ends, but here's what you do individually. And so you have this very strong switch between group and solo that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when everybody's in the same room is lost because then two people want to continue together or somebody gets stuck in a discussion. And so I think those are two things that I see as
Yeah,
strong benefits.
yeah. So let's also talk about money here for a moment. Like we all want more of it. Money is great. It's a great tool to help us have more choices and do things that we like. But in your findings, you do talk about, or in your lectures, you talk about monetary rewards versus social rewards apply to teamwork. Tell me a little bit more. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think there's very strong and long evidence that generally kind of salary and satisfaction with work are a lot less correlated than one might think, and purpose and all of this and purpose and how and engagement especially are just very much more important. I think at the same style in leadership research, it's still that formational leadership styles is the best, but kind
Mm-hmm.
of incentives are also
Mm-hmm.
a really great tool and are not so much worse. So I think this is, yeah, it's not that monetary incentives don't play a role, but you should never rely on them. And there's also kind of in reward research, there's quite strong evidence that you kill intrinsic motivation with monetary rewards.
Mm-hmm.
And but what you need for people to be really engaged at work is intrinsic motivation. So you shouldn't, if I think whenever you have monetary rewards as the major thing to drive motivation and performance, that's not really the best setup.
Yeah. I mean, in my own experience, again, work with organizations, I've noticed that, I mean, of course, the money is important, but I have not seen money really excite people. So I've worked with teams where the main incentive is money and they do their work, but there's just like not a lot of life to their work. It just
Yeah.
feels like very dry and very blah. And On the other hand, I've also worked with teams where the leader is kind of like more socially aware and involved in some of the things that you connect and things you were describing before. And I think recently I was doing a design research interview for myself for something I'm working on, and the person was basically boiling it down like he's really excited when he gets to do really cool things with really smart people.
Yeah.
And that for him, like that turns on the energy and
Yeah.
makes him very excited. So that comes up for me when I hear you explain these things. I mean, what about
I
in your own lived experience again, given that you're not only a
totally agree.
scientist, but yeah.
Totally agree. And even kind of own lived experience, look at science, like science,
Hmm.
or at least in Germany, but I'm not, well, at least in Germany, you don't go into science for money. You go into
Right.
science because you want to work very excited on a topic with very smart
Mhm.
people. And lots of people want to work in science. So yeah,
Yeah.
I just think it's right.
And one more topic here. Tell me about dominance of team dynamic patterns.
hmm Yeah, I think as a facilitator, you think that's why experience is important for facilitators,
Hmm.
because then at some point you just realize, I've seen a group behave like this. And know either what's worked in the past, kind of to bring them back on a good track, or kind of you in a way know what will happen next. And yeah, so I think it's just so it's I think when we in the prep talk we touched a bit on this topic, and I find it interesting that in if you look at teams as relationships, in
Hmm.
relationship researchers or in couple research or on attachment styles, is a big thing that you have like predominant relationship dynamics, and you just find different versions of them. And of course,
Hmm.
they're all a bit different, but they follow the big patterns. And I think that the same is true for team dynamics. I haven't thought about it enough to tell you the number of patterns that I see or that I've
Hmm.
seen, but I do think that you're often as a facilitator, it doesn't take you too long to kind of sense what type of team you're in,
Yeah.
I feel.
So say that a listener is excited about what they've heard today so far. Is there like a book or a speaker or a podcast or some resource that you can direct people to say like, hey, go learn more about this here in a way that's again accessible to a lay audience, not super technical?
So about neuroscience, impact on teamwork,
Yeah.
or actually, I mean, I have recorded a few lectures. I wouldn't say there's a like, maybe, oh, I'm not aware of it. Like a
Mm.
podcast where this is specifically research. Maybe I should
There's so
start it.
much out there. Yeah, we can't know all the things. Yeah.
Yeah, but I would really say it's more but I'm also always looking at the research literature. So I'm afraid I don't really have a perfect resource.
It's okay. All good. I mean, that happens in like emerging fields, right? It takes a while for some of that material to like make it out into like more like
Lay person.
material for the lay public, etc., education for the
Yeah.
lay public.
Yeah.
But anyway, but thank you for racking your brain there. See if you come up with something. Well, we're starting to like wind down our time together here. And just a question that I like to poke at before we go into our lightning round is that the name of this project is Making Business Art. I like to call it the other MBA. What comes up for you when you hear this phrase? What meaning do you make of it?
I think, well, for me, the art of relationships,
Mm.
after what we've talked
Mhm.
about, I mean, everything in business in a way is relationships.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so much about the people you know and the networks you have.
Mhm.
And yeah, and there's so much art in a relationship. What was, I think I heard Esther Perel, who's like the super famous
Mhm.
couple therapist who started working with kind of startup founder teams because she's like coming from the couple perspective and says, but the
Mhm.
others are relationships too. Yeah, and she said something that often kind of her counseling is more an art than a science. And so I think, yeah, in facilitation too, there's science behind how you can structure relationships and manage them, but at the same time, it's an art.
Well, let me poke at this and see what comes out. And if nothing comes out, that's fine too.
Okay.
But in terms of like your own lived experience and practice through like your lectures and also working as facilitator with teams and so forth, yeah, what's a way of being that you bring forth into your work that you find very beneficial? So we touched on some things before, like being comfortable with ambiguity. I don't know if you want to go back to that or if there's some other way of being that you notice you've developed that's very useful.
Well, I have to think of something that I read and that resonated with me. It's another famous therapist.
Hmm.
Also, it's a couple therapist. I forgot his name. But he said that he's very like in his 70s or something already. And he said kind of the older he became, the more he goes into the immediate interaction. So kind and I think he gave the example of there was like this 30-year-old woman who kind of her problem, the problem she brought into therapy with him. He was
Hmm.
maybe it was therapy generally also, was that she was like, oh yeah, she meets all these guys, but nobody really wants to commit to her. And then he kind of went into his experience with her, and he's like, so here we are, but I get the feeling that, kind of that you're not really ending up with me and so kind of he didn't talk, he really went into his own felt experience at this very moment in this very interaction. And I think this is something that I like as a way of being.
Hmm.
When I as a facilitator notice, oh my God, I'm getting so nervous or so tense, then it's very likely the others will feel similar, or at least somebody
Mm,
else will
yeah.
do. And so
Hmm.
I'll try to break this tension, or either I'll say this is very tense here, or I'll try to do something to break it. But kind of, I very much, yeah, I listen to my own experience in the moment, sense how the group dynamics are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for dancing with that question. I really appreciate it.
I like this question a lot, actually.
Well, I think we have reached the end of our time together. I'm just gonna let's just do a lightning round and then I'll open up the floor for you to share what you have going on. So for the lightning round, first question I have for you is what is the last piece of media that you loved? And that can be a book, a movie, podcast, or anything else.
I read a book by a German author, Ferdinand von Schirach, which I always like, but wasn't there something that struck me even more? Mm. Yeah, but yeah, no, doesn't come to my mind. So I'll keep it with
So
Ferdinand von
what was
Schirach.
the book and what you liked about it?
I like all of them. I think that the last one that I read was Rain.
That fiction?
It's fiction.
Okay.
You never know how much fiction it is. You always have the feeling that it's very much based in his own life. But that's exactly it. What I loved about the book is doesn't have, like, there's no ending. It ends
Mhm.
very abruptly.
Mhm.
And yeah. And then there's so much kind of said between the lines.
Mhm.
Like, I love if in books you have this one sentence here and there. I
Mhm.
always find that in Paul Auster and Haruki Murakami that you have these sentences where you're like, oh
Mhm.
my God, this sentence makes me think so much. It feels so much. And yeah, he had this. I think there's some of the sentence, and then there's
Mhm.
so many blanks that do
Mhm.
something with you,
Yeah.
with
Next
me.
question. What is something that inspires you?
What is something that inspires me? I think now because I'm looking out of the window, I actually, while I'm listening to you, I do find
Mhm.
the view from our house very inspirational. Like I find nature very inspirational, and I love having nature around me. And yeah, I find that it frees up your mind and
Mm.
it kind of calms the noise.
Yeah.
So
So
things can
what's a
pop out.
song or band that you must play during a solo road trip?
Oh, I switch on the radio and listen to what comes. And if I don't like it, I switch it off. That's really what I
Good
do.
enough. Good enough. So you just let randomness take over.
Yes. I think the
And
radio is such a great
yeah.
source of randomness.
And then final question is what do you want to see more of in the world?
Oh, I mean, in the current world, that's a difficult question, huh? The current state of the world isn't so promising. Yeah, so more things that bring hope that we're going in a better direction again, away from everything gets worse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right. Well, Caroline, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been
thank you.
fantastic. I'm gonna have to take all kinds of notes, like go back and take all kinds of notes on what we discussed and see what else I can apply to my own work. But yeah, so just let listeners know. So why should people look you up and where can they find you?
Okay, why should people look me up? I don't like to self-advertise, but let's just share the final thought that I wanted to share that you just made me think. I just read in preparation for our podcast, and I found this so fascinating that when you talk to a friend, you explore ideas. You don't converge on the same things, but you explore. That's
Mhm.
what makes conversations feel like fun. If you meet strangers, you're more okay, we're converging on the same things. But
Hmm.
if the less you're doing this and the more it's exploratory, the more fun you find in the conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I really enjoyed our conversation because it felt so exploratory today. And maybe that's why people should look me up. You should make your conversations and your relationships more exploratory, and you will excite yourself and others. No, but in general, I think people should look me up if they're interested in team facilitation, leadership coaching with a focus on
Hmm.
relationship dynamics and building. And then, well, LinkedIn, because our agency
Hmm.
website is, oh my gosh, 10 years old. I don't know. And we've
Okay.
never done anything of it because it was just word of mouth. So LinkedIn is definitely a good way to get in touch.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, candui.com. You can also email me via this. And then relationship holidays.com for the upcoming retreats on San Miguel.
That's right. In the Azores. And then people can go surfing. Is there time for people to go play?
Oh, the whole idea of kind of all of this relationship holidays, if it's for individuals or if it's for companies,
Yeah.
is that is kind of holidays plus. So there's always going to be time scheduled, or even like with surf lessons for the retreat already planned, and there's a waterfall hike planned, and there's in the volcanic hot springs like a relaxation
Sounds
session planned, and
sounds
stuff
awesome.
like this, plus sessions. Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Caroline. This has been a fantastic conversation today, and maybe we'll have you back later on to do a deep dive in something or other, but it's just been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with me.
It's been lots of fun. Thanks for sharing your time.